May the
This
words of my
meeting
mouth
is
and the
being
meditations of all of
recorded.
our hearts be always acceptable to you, O God, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Please be seated. In our music director, John Gresha's announcement last Sunday, sharing with us that he has accepted a new position at Wayne Presbyterian Church, he told us the following. What I see at St. Mary's is a church that has the strongest leadership, a continually growing congregation, a healthy and incredibly vibrant choir, and a sense of mission and purpose that will carry it through most anything. If I ever had to consider leaving, this would be the time. St. Mary's is a church community firing on all cylinders. Now, I think John generally means what he says. He is a pretty sincere guy. So if we take John at his word, I think he's telling us, more or less, St. Mary's, I believe in you. You've got this. Now, John's belief and confidence in us may be cold comfort, since many of us would rather just have him stay. Indeed, John has been one of the few constants in the leadership of this parish over these last 20 plus years. And that kind of constancy is a rare and precious gift. Even better, far from being a curmudgeonly constant, John has a gracious, humble, encouraging way of being that has blessed each one of us and has most certainly blessed this place. I dare say that perhaps some of John's gifts have even, through our continuous exposure to them over these 20-odd years, become part of us, both as individuals and as a community, seeping almost imperceptibly into our own ways of being. Being around good people can do that to us. It can make us better. And we don't lose that, God willing, when a good person departs. In our gospel text today, we find the disciples alone and afraid in the absence of their teacher. Immediately after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus wants to be left alone to pray. So Jesus tells the disciples to cross the Sea of Galilee without him. It was evening and it was dark. I don't know how common it would have been to cross the Sea of Galilee at night, but whether usual or unusual, many of the disciples were fishermen, so they were surely accustomed to navigating the sea under a variety of conditions. And presumably, they would also have been skilled at reading the weather. So surely the disciples should have been able to predict what was going to happen next, don't you think? I wonder if they were anxious about crossing the sea under whatever conditions might have been discernible that evening. The text doesn't fill us in. It only tells us that they listen to Jesus and they go, perhaps even against their better judgment. As the disciples were crossing the sea, of course, a storm arises, and they aren't able to make much progress as they're being battered by waves and the winds are blowing against them. They must have been very frightened and probably frustrated too. I, for one, would have been upset with Jesus for sending us off on our own and into a storm, no less. And if I had had any trepidation about the weather or about making an evening crossing, I would have also been upset that I didn't voice my concern before we set out on our journey. The text doesn't give us much insight into the disciples' inner experience. I think we can make some educated guesses, though, about what the disciples might have been thinking and feeling while trapped on that boat in the midst of a storm, in the middle of the Sea of Galilee for that long, long, long night. I'm sure many of us can quite easily relate to the disciples' experience. In life, we can so often end up feeling stuck, feeling claustrophobically trapped in our own experience, unable to see anything except what's right in front of us. In situations like these, it's so tough to get any perspective on our situation. For the disciples, the wind and the waves and the soupy night air had likely conspired to make it difficult to even see one another. Even in such close proximity on such a small boat, each disciple was likely enclosed in his own little world, swaddled by the mist and fog into an illusion of isolation. I wonder what the disciples did all night on that little boat in the middle of the big sea. I'm guessing they stopped rowing at some point, since it wasn't doing much good anyway. But did they pray? Did they sing? Did they hold on to one another for dear life? Did they recall with amazement what had transpired the prior day when the multitudes were fed? Did they express love toward one another in case they didn't live to see the morning? For surely death by drowning must have seemed like a real possibility during portions of that frightening night. Perhaps they did these things. Surely they didn't sleep much during that long night. Indeed, they were so sleep-deprived and anxious that when Jesus appeared to them the next morning, they initially mistook him for a ghost. They were afraid, so very afraid. Which prompted Jesus to utter his most famous of refrains, "Do not be afraid. Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." But they were afraid, so very afraid. Even when Jesus enabled Peter to walk toward him on the water, Peter's fear is whipped up again by the winds, and he begins to sink. Jesus, of course, reaches out and catches Peter, chiding him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" It is simply our human tendency to doubt. Why presume things will go well when they could just as easily go poorly? We can at least save ourselves from the pain of disappointment. So why trust John Gresham when he tells us, "St. Mary's, I believe in you, you've got this"? He's just saying that, we might imagine, to soften the blow. Not because he really believes it's true, not because he sees more in us than we see in ourselves, not because he trusts God's work in and among us, and because he trusts God to guide the next leg of our journey. Like the disciples, who felt so lost without Jesus sharing their nighttime journey across the sea, many of you have been reeling from the news of our impending loss of John Gresham. Some are wondering, what will St. Mary's be without John? How can we feel excitement about the future and hope for new possibilities when we've already known the best of the best? Many around here do believe that John walks on water. But John would never want to walk on water alone. So in his own inimitable way, John has been nurturing our water walking capacities for these past 20 years. We will miss John mightily when he leaves, but we need not try to hold on to him. We can allow John to go with our blessing, because the many gifts he has given us will always be near, on our lips and in our hearts. They are now ours, and they are ours to keep. We have become a more gracious and graceful people, and we are continuously learning to live according to the unhurried rhythms of grace. John sees this in us. He sees our readiness to face whatever may come next, to keep singing God's song even in a strange and foreign land. So I pray that we will know in our bones, in our hearts, in our spirits, and in our voices that we will be okay. That God's song will never go silent in or among us, even without John leading us. And I know that John will be rooting for us, whatever kind of good trouble we decide to get into with and for God on the next leg of our journey. May it be so.